Hey, what's up? And welcome to the Adventures of Jerkface, a place where we tell silly stories about serious topics. Thanks for checking us out. Each week, we give some thoughts and tips to help you become the best version of you. I'm your host, Brian, and let's get started. The previous episode, it ended with Steve walking away and Jerkface was left to his own thoughts. They grew up on the same street, and yet they also lived in very different realities, and Jerkface never knew it. This episode looks at the huge swing lots of people take upon being woke for the first time. Even though a lot of this information is hiding in plain sight, many of us, for many different reasons, never see it. But when we do, watch out. We go from not doing a thing to trying to fix everything. Problem is, we usually do this from our perspective, which most times is really just being a different kind of jerkface. The intention of this episode is to help spot out and avoid the white savior complex on our way towards the work of anti-racism. So, let's get back to Jerkface. The transition was not smooth, but it was started. For Jerkface, being woke was weird. Not only did he see his own biases and prejudice around race for the first time in his life, but he also started seeing other people's racism and how the system in the U.S. works for him, but not Steve. But he didn't feel anything other than anger, and he thought that's not right, so he jumped right in and started his campaign as the white savior. Though Jerkface had only just recently awakened to these, he began a surge of activity. He read blogs and books, went to protest, he posted pictures of his social justice crusades. On social media, he let all his white friends know how racist they were and how oppressive America was. If they didn't like it, they could just unfriend him. He was on a mission to be the voice of the voiceless. Unfortunately, he did not notice that he would get so excited about his efforts that he would talk over people he was trying to help instead of listening. Just because he wasn't trying to be a white-splaining jerkface didn't mean he wasn't one. Jerkface has now moved into the role of white savior. He was going to fix the problems of black people, but was doing it without the understanding that he was not understanding their history, needs, or the current state of affairs. He didn't ask about it. He just started trying to fix things based on his perception of stuff. He wanted to see political reforms and racial reconciliation and unity. Meanwhile, his black friends, they were aching to see institutional justice and the end of white supremacy at both individual and systemic levels. And Jerkface was getting angry again. He was doing all these good things and he wasn't getting any gratitude from his new black friends. He decided to talk to Steve about this, and he said, "You know what we need to do?" And Steve said, "We?" Jerkface got quiet and a little hot. "Yeah, we." Steve said, "I appreciate your anger, I do, but my heart is heavy. No matter what you can imagine or how much you read or how hard you work, it's tougher than you think it is." "You ever heard of Lilla Watson?" Steve asked. "No. Who is she?" replied Jerkface. "She's an artist and an activist that has a famous quote that I resonate with. So, if you've come here to help me, you're wasting your time, but if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." That's exactly how I feel. I don't want or need your help. Jerkface started to say something, and then wisely he stopped. Well, Steve went on. He finally hit a place where he didn't care if Jerkface could handle his blackness or his anger. This isn't one story nor one moment in the news cycle. It's foundational, and it permeates every layer of society. It's literally the air we breathe. Jerkface tried to understand and asked, "So what I'm hearing is that you're mad at me?" Infuriated, Steve asked, "What? Mad at you?" "No," Steve yelled. "This isn't even about you or your feelings. I'm sad, angry, hurt, frustrated. I'm exhausted. And I'm wholly uninterested in conversations about your idea of unity that's not even rooted in the unrelenting pursuit of racial justice. I don't want to be unified to your version of what you think black people need. It's not about fixing black problems. It's about fixing flaws in the United States of America. Well, then Steve walked out. And Steve's dad walked in. "Hey, Jerkface," Mr. Steve said. "What's going on?" "Not much, Mr. Steve. I'm just making Steve mad." "Again," replied Jerkface. "I see. You want something to drink?" he asked. Jerkface replied, "Sure, thanks." "Well, you've been here enough. You know where the fridge is. Go get yourself something and bring me something too. And a cup of ice." "Thanks, Jerkface. So what's going on?" Mr. Steve asked while he drank his drink. Well, Jerkface thought for a minute about what to say. Last thing he wanted to do was make Mr. Steve mad too. Well, then he took a risk and he said in one long breath, "I keep making Steve angry and I don't know what to do. Black Lives Matter, of course they do, and I want to do something, but I keep messing up. I'm so confused. I'm supposed to just listen to black community leaders, but then no, not them, and then if I'm silent, I'm part of the problem, and if I speak, I'm part of the problem, and if I have to ask, I don't understand, and if I don't ask, I either don't care or I'm taking over. If I stay home, I'm just another moderate white, but if I show up, I'm in the way, and I just don't know where to fit in." Jerkface was having an ice creamless brain freeze. Mr. Steve sat in quiet for a while. And then he sat in quiet for another while, maybe two. Mr. Steve smiled and said, "Kind of reminds me of marriage." And then he asked, "Son, do you remember when you first heard the Miles Davis album, Kind of Blue?" Jerkface nodded and asked, "Yeah." "Well, for you, that is the first time you ever heard it. And since it was the first time you ever heard it, you thought you discovered it." They both laughed. "Same thing happened to me." "I'm thinking that might be part of the problem with you and Steve. You have just started listening to racism for the first time, and you've thought that no one was hearing it until now. Don't get me wrong, I'm very glad and excited to know you're hearing it. But to Steve, he's had to hear it his whole life. We're more than glad you're noticing these things, but at the same time, we are beyond tired." Jerkface, for the first time that he could remember, he didn't say anything. Not because he was waiting for his turn to speak. He actually did not have anything to say. He only wanted to listen to Mr. Steve. You probably can't imagine constantly being suspected, accused, watched, doubted, distrusted, presumed guilty, and even feared. This is a burden of black people that can't be understood or confronted without a deeper conversation about our country's history of racial injustice. And this is all just 2 houses down from your house. You probably never had to have a conversation with your parents about coming home alive, or see uncles and aunts come home beat up and bit up for sitting in a diner. Jerkface shook his head. Or how to act if the police question you. Another shake. Have you ever wondered if a teacher didn't like you because you're white? Or if you were rejected for a job for being white? And another shake. Steve has to think about these types of things every day, and so do I. And so does every black person I know. If people are kneeling on necks in broad daylight, or shooting joggers, or making threats about calling the police in a park on video, imagine what they're doing in classrooms and HR departments, banks, and so forth around the country where videos aren't capturing it. I'm thinking that's what's going on with you and Steve, is similar to someone saying, "All lives matter," as a counter to Black Lives Matter. Steve speaks up in a time of obvious pain and hurt, and you only respond with anger and a plan for what's next. It's true, but hurtful and cruel in this moment. Know what I mean? Yes, sir. Unfortunately, I do. Mr. Steve decided that it was the right time to drop some more knowledge. A wise man once told me that in order to truly empathize with someone's experience, you must be willing to believe them as they see it and not how you imagine their experience to be. Jerkface, you must be fully willing to get right inside of the other person's existence until you can see things with black people's eyes and think things from black people's minds and feel things that black people feel. And Jerkface, you got to do all that while remembering that you are not black. It's much more intense than the definition of the word empathy that folk gratuitously use in our Western culture. Certainly can't happen overnight. It's a process, but white allies have to be willing. I believe this would kill complicity where it stood. Jerkface took this in deeply. Thanks, Mr. Steve. You taught me a lot and have given me a ton of great information. Jerkface thought the conversation was over. Insight is cheap, man. Mr. Steve pointed out, information is not transformation. Being woke is good and all, but knowing something is wrong and doing something about it are two completely different things. Mr. Steve continued, otherwise, you'll just be a different kind of dangerous Jerkface because you'll ignore Steve as a person and make your feelings and perspective the most important thing. And in the end, you'll at best just end up protecting your whiteness and force Steve to fend for himself. We don't need another story of a white guy coming in to save black people. We want to know that you know where we're coming from and are with us wherever we're going, no matter what. Jerkface was quiet for a while. Thanks, Mr. Steve. How are you not angry like Steve? Mr. Steve laughed and he said, son, I've sat with anger so long that she finally told me her name was grief. I have one more question. Go for it, said Mr. Steve. I want to do something, but I'm scared, and I don't want to mess up and hurt Steve, but I think it would hurt even more if I didn't do anything. What can I do? That's an easy answer, young man. Do the best you can until you know better. Then, when you know better, do better. Wow, Mr. Steve, did you just make that up? Mr. Steve laughed again. He said, nah, it's just another one of our classics like Kinda Blue. Look up Maya Angelou. Trust me, you will not be disappointed. Thanks for joining us this week on Adventures of Jerkface. Make sure to visit us on social media or on our website, jerkfacepodcast.com, where you can subscribe to the podcast. You can also subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Look for Adventures of Jerkface, or if you want to watch the show in video format, check us out on the Jerkface Podcast YouTube channel. And until we meet again, stay prompted, Jerkfaces.